you. I'm coming here from Norwegian Institute of Public Health, but I'm also coming from the European Joint Action. I like to walk around and talk, so I hope that's okay with you. So I don't know if you're familiar with European Joint Actions, but basically they're a way to try to get European countries to work together. Of course, we're not going to coordinate, but we can try to collaborate, and so joint actions are used to try to get the European countries going towards a common direction. So a joint action was announced in AMR. It started last year. It's one of the most popular joint actions, you'll be glad to hear. So there is a strong focus on AMR in the European Union. The joint action that I co-lead is research and innovation, and we're focused on 3 tasks. Firstly, we're looking at how do we set research priorities. We need to know that where are the research gaps to make sure that the monies that are needed are going to the priority research gaps. The second thing is to look at incentives. How can we implement European incentives? This is something that's needed. As we've heard, this is a global approach or a European approach, so we need to look at how we can work together. And the third is, we spend a lot of money on this research, so how do we ensure that the evidence that's generated is brought back into policies, and the policies and clinical guidelines reflect that? Yes, so there's a lot of market failures out there with antibiotics and AMR, unfortunately. So we're One Health. I'm sure you've probably heard One Health already today, but One Health means that you've got to work in the animal sector. You have to work in vaccines, you've got to look at diagnostics. I've heard AMR referred to as a wicked problem. It's very complicated, it's not easy, we can't fix it. Bacteria evolve, they're always going to evolve, they're always going to develop resistance, so this is not something that can be solved. But we can control it. So in the joint action, we're looking across all these technologies. Now, if we look first at diagnostics, there's a market failure here because the diagnostics cost more than the antibiotics. So if you're a cash-strapped hospital and you're looking at how you can save money, the idea is to save it on diagnostics. You know, if you can use a nice broad-spectrum antibiotic that works, you're pretty sure this patient has an infection, then you can skip the diagnostics, save the hospital some money. So there was the Longitude Prize. I don't know if anyone heard of the Longitude Prize here. No, it's the Longitude Prize is given out by the UK, and the idea is to get a rapid diagnostic for bacterial infections. There's 75 teams that have qualified for this prize, so a lot of activity going on, right? This report was just published a couple weeks back. And they looked at the number of patents. So here we come to patents. We've already talked a bit about patents today. So they looked at the number of patents in the bacterial space, diagnostic space, and there's a bit of a delay. So we can't say that, boom, it's dropped like this, but there's a delay regarding publishing. But what we see is the Longitude Prize was launched in 2013. And then you see the peak of the patents there. And then since then, it's gradually been going down. And this report says that these 75 teams, they've been shortlisted, right? They're the best of the best. They've been vetted. They're saying that these are promising technologies. We think these could be good. But investors are saying, well, I'm not sure I want to invest in this because price expectations are too low, and they're not convinced that the hospitals are going to pay for them, or the primary care clinics. So that's a problem. And what the report recommends is purchase commitments. So they've come out and said some countries need to go forward and say, we are going to purchase diagnostics, even though it costs more than the antibiotic itself, to make sure that we're treating bacterial infections appropriately. Now here in Norway, you all know that you go to your primary care physician and you cannot get an antibiotic for you or your child because they want a CRP. But this is very unusual. Most countries do not use this. So we're looking to see how can we incentivize more countries to start using diagnostics. Vaccines. Of course, why not prevent the infection before it happens? So 2 of these reports have come out recently. One is on human vaccines and one is on vaccines for animals, for livestock. Saying, where do we need to invest? But of course, there's only so much research money. So we can't invest in everything. So this is prioritization regarding which vaccines we should be investing in, and we need more research money there. So I apologize, sorry, I'm a little sick, so I might start to croak here. So this report was published in July. So this is looking at the antibiotic pipeline. Now you've already heard quite a bit about the antibiotic pipeline today. You've heard it's insufficient. So right now in the antibiotic pipeline, we're looking at 30 new chemical entities, 30 potentially new antibiotics. 10 biological products, 10 against TB, and 4 against another infection called C. difficile. So if you compare this to cancer, there's over 800 products right now in clinical trials for cancer. 800 compared to 30. And the reason this is because you can't make any money on antibiotics. Most of the antibiotics that are out there today still work, and that's great. We want that. In Norway, 40% of our use is on narrow-spectrum penicillin. The oldest penicillin, way back to Fleming. And this is good. This is great. It's cheap. It's effective. We want new antibiotics to sit on the shelf that we can break the glass when that individual patient or multiple patients comes along and needs that antibiotic to be treated. But we don't want to start treating large numbers of patients with the newest and best antibiotics. We want them there as an insurance policy, because as soon as you start to use an antibiotic, you start to develop resistance. So it's not going to work. We've heard about the business model and so that's why we're looking at alternative ways to reward innovation. Now, if you look, for example, here's another example. I'm sure you can't see this in the back, so I apologize. There's a new antibiotic that came out in August 2017 in the US. This is US sales data. It's called Vabomere. Now, has anyone heard about the WHO priority pathogen list? So World Health Organization has come out and said, these are the pathogens that we must invest research and development in because we do not have sufficient antibiotics. And the top of the list, there's 3 awful pathogens that we want to invest in, and one of those is CRE. So this Vabomere is for CRE. So this is what we need new antibiotics for, right? This is what WHO is saying is the most pressing issue. But Vabomere in the US, it was just approved in the EMA last month, is earning less than $1 million a month in the US. I don't know, for me, I'd love to get $1 million a month, but if you think about it, it costs about $80 million to make a plant, to make a production facility. And then you've got to make this stuff, you've got to get it out, you've got to get regulatory approval. This is just not enough money. Pharmaceutical industry has told us that you could have a perpetual patent and you will not make enough money on antibiotics, because this is exactly what we want to have happen. We want the newest and best antibiotics to be used sparingly. We don't want to start using lots of Vabomere. We want to use meropenem when we can use it, and use those older antibiotics. So there's been a load of reports written on this, and I wrote one myself. So they've all come up with pretty much the same recommendations. So that's good, because this is from the UK, this is from France, this is from Germany, and this is from Europe, looking at a global perspective. They all say we need both push and pull. So push pays for R&D. This is what we're going to do to make sure that there's enough money out there to finance research and development. And pull tries to fix that market. That $1 million a month for Vabomere is looking at how do we make the market more attractive. We do not want to make antibiotics into neglected tropical diseases. Neglected tropical diseases are almost 100% financed by the public sector. And they get $3 billion a year, every year, $3 billion, across 50 neglected tropical diseases. It doesn't go up and it doesn't go down. It's basically static. And basically what you're doing is you're saying that we're relying on the political processes to allocate money every single year to these. So this is not something we want to do. We want antibiotics to be a competitive, healthy market. And in order to do that, we need something called pull. And that means that we want the market to be more attractive to the private sector. If you look at public sector financing of antibiotics in 2017, we spent $550 million. This is a significant increase, by the way. So this is great. The public sector is investing more money. But the private sector invested in 2016, $2 billion. And that's what you want to do. What you want to do is you want to utilize the public sector funds to ratchet up the private sector investment. Because some of those funds will be lost. It's a private sector. They have an expectation to earn a profit off of this. But as we've heard, this is a high-risk endeavor. And when you look at developing antibiotics, 95% will fail. So what we want to do is we want to ensure that the private sector is also investing in that with the expectation of a return on investment. So if we look at the progress to date, there's some coordination going on through the G20, which is good. And you're seeing a lot of push. I'm not sure how many of you actively work in research here for antibiotics, but there's some very good new mechanisms that have come to light. CARB-X, this is a partnership between the US and Wellcome Trust. It funds preclinical research up to phase 1, and we're seeing a much stronger pipeline coming in the early phases now because of this. CARB-X will fund anybody in the world as long as they think you've got a viable product. And so we're seeing that the pipeline is actually moving towards these priority pathogens. So that's quite positive. There's an initiative with the World Health Organization called GARD-P, and they're focusing on sepsis and drug-resistant gonorrhea. So we're also seeing that there's more investment there. In Denmark, they came out a couple of months ago with the Repair Fund. Excuse me. And this is actually private equity. It's Novo Nordisk, which is a pharmaceutical company, private equity firm. And they're also looking to finance preclinical, but they will take a stake of equity in the company. But you're seeing that the push money is coming, and this is great. But the pull is not coming at all. And what we want to do is we need to find ways to innovate companies for bringing a new antibiotic to market that meets one of these critical priority pathogens or one of the high priority pathogens. And because of that, what we've recommended is that we come up with something called the delinked payment, in that companies are rewarded for innovation. They're not rewarded for sales. We don't want antibiotics to be out there pushed by unit sales. We want them to be rewarded for bringing a product to market that may never be used. Hopefully in Norway we don't use it because we have great infection control, we've got great stewardship routines. But we can have it there to break that glass in case somebody actually needs it. So all of these reports here came out, the last one, Drive AB, came out in January 2018. Now this report, this antimicrobial resistance benchmark, talked to 29 different companies involved in the antibiotic space. And they looked at how do you work with environmental controls to make sure that we don't have antibiotic waste seeping out into the environment? How do you ensure responsible use? Are you paying your salespeople for unit sales to get high unit sales volumes? What kind of things are you doing that influences stewardship and environmental use? But the problem is this was published in January 2018, and now 5 of the 29 companies have left the market. And so that's 2 large pharmaceutical companies, Sanofi and Novartis. Now this is particularly alarming, not because the large pharmaceutical companies do a ton of innovation, they don't. Almost all the innovation comes from small and medium-sized companies. But large pharmaceutical companies get the product out. Small companies generally only work on their home turf. So a lot of these are American. You'll see that they're purely interested in the American market and really not much more. They're hoping they can license it out to some large pharmaceutical company to get Europe and Japan and Australia and maybe Canada too. But really, there's not a lot of interest. And so the large pharmaceutical companies, when you lose them, you do not get your product to India, to Thailand, to these places where there are drug-resistant infections, the patients that need it to stop the spread of that type of infection. So losing the large pharmaceutical companies is a huge loss. 2 of 12 are small and medium-sized enterprises. You could expect, okay, based on attrition, that small companies are leaving the market. You know, their science failed, therefore, if they're a one-product company, that's all they've got, so that you should expect that to happen. But the problem is that these companies can't access cash because the market doesn't work. So they're not leaving the market because it's a bad product, or at least it hasn't been shown to be a bad product yet. They're leaving because they can't get enough cash to pay the employees from month to month. And the last is 1 of 10 is a generic company. So it's not just a problem with new antibiotics, it's also a problem with old antibiotics. Norway, we use old penicillin. It works very well. We like it. We want to keep using it. We don't want to go to something more broad spectrum, but nobody else uses it. It's a very fragile market. It's very consolidated. There's only a couple producers. So what's happening is we're losing those older antibiotics that also don't have much of a market. And we'll see that because of stockouts, this exacerbates antibiotic resistance, because then what physicians do is they move to more broad spectrum products. What you really want to be focused on, you want to be focused on narrow spectrum or the pathogen in order to actually not influence the gut flora. I apologize, I'm not a microbiologist or a clinician, so maybe I'm saying something wrong here, so you can correct me. So what are we doing in Europe about this? So we've paid for a lot of reports. All those reports were paid for by European research money. And in the national action plans, you should know that all European countries have a national action plan for AMR, which is good, and they're implementing it. Unfortunately, not everyone has financed them yet, so that's a problem. But Norway has, so that's good. But if you look at this, it's really only France that's got some sort of action verb in there about doing something. France says that they're going to provide innovative products and technologies. In Norway, we're going to participate actively in the international debate, so thank you for participating in the international debate here today. In Spain, we're going to study. In Sweden, we're developing knowledge. In the UK, we're assessing the relative merits. Now, just to give UK a bit of credit, this was written about 5-6 years ago, so they're writing a new plan as we speak. Excuse me. So, in the European Joint Action, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to sit down with these countries who said they're interested in it. Everybody says this is a big issue because in Greece, they're having huge problems with resistance and they need these new drugs. So what we're trying to do is sit down with first mover countries and sit on the table and say, look, you've got all this evidence. We've generated all this evidence. What is it that you're willing to do? And try to find some first movers. I was at a meeting in DC a couple weeks back, and someone compared this to when the wildebeest run across the river in order to get to the grassy fields on the other side, but the first one's going to be eaten by the crocodiles. And that's basically where we're at. No country wants to dip their toe in that river right now because they don't want to do it on their own. They want to do this together. This can be expensive. And probably we're going to try some incentives, and they're probably going to fail. We need to learn, try something, fix it, and keep going. And looking to make sure that we don't lose more antibiotic companies in this space. So that's what we're trying to do with the European Joint Action. We're going to be going around talking to countries starting in January and trying to get that informal dialogue and understand where the barriers are. We're looking at different financing options using the European Investment Bank as a possibility, because that could be a good possibility for financing, because financing, of course, is the key. We also are looking at taxation. Taxation is an important part of it. And so if you have any ideas and would like to discuss them, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you after this meeting. And that's it. Thank you very much.